Every timber frame home starts long before the first piece of wood is cut. It starts with a vision, with a patch of ground, some big questions, and a lot of dreaming. I've been slowly working towards building our own timber frame home here in the woods, and today I'm walking the site with Brent from Dovetail Timberworks. We first connected through YouTube a few years ago, and we've chatted quite a bit since then, but this is actually the first time that we've met in person. Brent's an experienced timber framer, and today he's here to help me think through some of the key things you might want to consider before starting a build like this. It's not really a checklist, more of just a conversation as we roam through the forest and talk things through. One of the first things, of course, is site selection.
And so you want to make sure that you've got exposure to the south. You don't have to cut too many trees. There aren't hills or other obstacles in the way. Because timber frames are nice in that there's a large gap in between structural elements, which means that you have a kind of a blank canvas for lots of windows. Yeah, and you're on a hillside, which is really nice because drainage away from your work site during construction, as well as the final building, will be easy to achieve.
Okay.
So I don't think you'll have any problems with water here. So you have to think about, where you're going to assemble the frame on the ground, because they get assembled horizontally first, and then where the boom truck is going to sit and how to pick it up and move from there.
This site, you think, I'm not holding you to it, but you think could work for me?
This site will work very well.
Okay.
I like seeing rock exposed here and there, which would indicate that the soil is probably strong enough to support any foundation design.
All right, so the second thing we were talking about, Brent, was how to pick the type of trees to use for your timber frame.
Around this part of the world and eastern United States, white pine is the preferred species. Okay. It is light, it is very easy to work, it has a very small shrinkage ratio. So it is not a very strong wood, but typically when you're designing a timber frame, you're also designing for aesthetics, and everybody wants the big, large timbers. So once you've done that, within reason, you need to talk to your engineer, but once you've done that, you're more than strong enough to do what needs to be done. So white pine is an amazing timber frame material, and in eastern Canada plus eastern US, they're lucky to have such great trees.
Over the winter, I snowshoed the property to pick out what I think are some good white pines. So I'd like to take you around and show you some of them to see if I've done a good job or not. But earlier you mentioned some reasons why. Or sorry, back up. When I was doing that, there was quite a few that were nice, tall, straight, not many branches, I think really good ones. But there's no shortage of pines on this property that branch like this one do. So Brent, you said one reason for the pines that split like this might be the pine weevil, but then you told me earlier another reason, which I found actually even more interesting.
Well, I'm not sure how much science there is behind all this, but there is a school of thought that from years and years ago, they were sort of genetically favored inadvertently by the shipbuilding industry. So they favored and harvested all of the perfectly straight trees for ship masts, and basically all that was left to reproduce were these crooked trees that were unsuitable for shipbuilding. So they were left to stay here and reproduce.
So Brent, when I was snowshoeing around in the winter picking out trees, this is one that I thought was going to be a good tree.
This is a great tree.
How did I do, and why is it good, and what do you think about it?
Well, one of the things I like about it, it's a decent size. For folks that aren't from around here, they will get a lot larger than this, even in eastern Canada. But it's a good size. But the big thing is it's perfectly straight, so you're not going to have to avoid any curves. Because typically what happens is you end up with a curve right in the middle of where you want to put a timber, and it doesn't work. So not only is it perfectly straight, but it also doesn't taper very much. So if your tree is shaped like a carrot, there's a couple issues with that. One, you run out of diameter really early, but you also end up with a lot of grain run out, and engineers don't like a lot of grain run out, especially on horizontal members. And also there's at least 2 good logs before you run into a knot cluster. The presence of knots are a problem, but also knot clusters engineers don't like. And I don't see any knot clusters for quite a ways, and we actually don't have very many branches until about 20 feet or so. So there's a couple of good logs in here. And even above that, you'll still be able to use that for boards.
So yeah, so that's another item is your tree selection for timber framing. So I've walked the property here and started to flag trees that I think are good ones. This is helpful for me to get Brent's approval that these are good trees. So on my to-do list moving forward is to start taking some of these down, and I'll walk through that on a future video. But yeah, so far we've gone through site selection, tree selection. So one thing for me, Brent, as I'm doing this, and even with the cabin, in my ideal world, I'd love to do everything myself.
Yeah.
But practically speaking, There's certain things that I have probably more skill set for. And then it's also sometimes a time balancing thing.
Yeah, the balance is really going to be unique depending on the individual. I mean, you have logistical requirements. I mean, you have your own wood lot, which you ought to be able to use for a significant portion of your work. You've got a small tractor. You've got some skills. You've got some experience. And but there's also a couple other elements to think about: is what you enjoy doing and what you don't. But there's other things like safety element too. You can stand a timber frame up all on your own using winches and gin poles and all that sort of stuff. But to spend $1,000 on a boom truck is very safe.
Right.
You know, it's overbuilt for the job, so you've got lots of redundancy in there, and they can move things around for you very carefully and very safely.
The way I'm hoping this can work is like some of the groundwork and foundation work. I think I'm gonna need help. The like logging, I hope to do a fair amount of. Milling, I mean, most if not all of. Joinery is where I'm hoping that you can kind of mentor me and then let me be on my own for a while, but maybe with some help from you along the way. That's another one, is just finding the balance for the individual doing it or the family who's doing it that works for you. You'd said to me, you know, certain regulations and things to pay attention to. What knowledge could you share on that topic?
As for timber framing, typically the planning authorities that I've worked with, they don't understand timber framing well enough. So typically they will want full engineering for the job.
Okay.
So that's an additional expense, also an additional time element that you have to consider. So the engineer is going to need time to do that. Typically, once the planning authorities have a stamped, approved set of drawings, they're happy and you can kind of proceed quite efficiently from there.
A point you were making is one of the things that a beginner timber framer should be thinking about is just thinking through the regulations and things ahead of time, so you're not reacting and you're planning ahead. What's a guy like me or a new timber framer looking at in terms of tools, and how do you go about this?
This will be your most heavily used saw. This is your standard sort of 7 1/4 saw. The brand doesn't really matter unless you're getting into gigantic scales of work.
Okay.
Most of the good quality brands will do the job. This is a worm drive, but more significantly, it's a 10 1/4 that will do a lot of work for you. And occasionally we need the large one, which I affectionately refer to as Big Bertha.
So for someone like me, just what you're saying now, like I've already got one like you've got in your hand there. I have neither of these two. It may not make sense for me to buy one of these.
No.
Like I'm guessing.
I understand the temptations,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
probably not.
Okay.
I would recommend this.
Okay.
Because it will enable a lot of work far more efficiently. And if there's something you can't go through, then a well-tuned handsaw will finish the job for you without too much trouble.
This is another tool from your shop. Oh, what's this one? And is it something I'd need?
Well, this is referred to as a chain mortar, sir, and I will argue that this is the biggest time saver for a commercial timber framer or any timber framer at any scale.
Of the timber framing specific tools that a person might spend bigger money on, this seems to be the one that you might be able to justify.
This is it.
Now we're into some hand tools.
Yeah, the hand tool side of things is really as important and as big as the power tool side of things. One of the fundamental things that you always are going to have is, I would say, a 2-inch chisel is kind of a staple of timber framing. You need a good mallet. A lot of folks will just make one out of firewood into the last one frame. With all your chisels and your planes, they are going to need to be sharpened on a regular basis. Get yourself a sharpening system that will reliably work, because it will make your entire work process so much more enjoyable. But I also use templates a lot. Carpenters use templates a lot for various things, but not many timber framers do. But I use templates fairly often, and I follow the logic that the less often you measure something, the less often you're going to make a mistake in measuring. So this is a probe that I use to check mortises. It is exactly 2 inches thick. It's made of oak and it's well oiled and should stay that way. And this underneath here is a template that I use for checking the tenons. It's also exactly 2 inches. If both of these work, then they'll go together and you have no surprises.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That's a great overview of the tools, which is one of the items we wanted to touch on today. Just that you want to put some thought into what tools you want, and like you mentioned, just finding that balance. Like, you know, sure, in an ideal world, I'd have all the top quality tools, and in reality, I want to hit that point where I have what I need to do a good job without also breaking the bank in the process. So thanks so much for coming out. I found that really helpful to go over kind of those 5 things. So can I hopefully for people watching the channel too, that who might be thinking of this kind of a project to get an idea of some things to think about in the early stages. Yeah, so thanks for that. Great to finally get to meet you in real life. We've
in person.
known each other now for a couple of years online, but that's really fun. And yeah, I had a great day, just kind of roaming around the woods, talking and thinking.
Yeah.
And we had lunch down at the cabin, off video, but we've been asking ourselves, like, how do we integrate dovetail concepts that I used in the cabin with timber framing concepts? And then Brent came up with a pretty cool idea that we think we're going to try.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We'll leave it as in suspense, maybe. Yeah. But it'll be really interesting to incorporate those elements together, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's a real nice result of meeting up today. So anyway, Brent's gonna head out and do his thing for the afternoon, and I'm gonna do mine. But yeah, thanks so much for this.
Thanks.